Staff Sergeant Robert Bobby. Mitchell adjusted his dress uniform one final time as he walked through the revolving glass doors of the towering corporate headquarters, his polished combat boots clicking against the marble floor with military precision. At 35 years old, Bobby carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from 12 years of active duty service, including 3 tours overseas that had taught him the value of discipline, honor, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Today marked his first day as head of security for Meridian Industries, one of the city's largest tech companies, a civilian job he'd taken after his medical discharge following an IED explosion that had left him with a slight limp and a purple heart medal that now sat in a drawer at home next to his 7-year-old daughter, Emma's drawings. The transition from military life to corporate security had been challenging for Bobby, not because he lacked the skills or dedication, but because the priorities seemed so different in the civilian world, where the military had taught him that every person under his protection mattered equally. The corporate environment seemed to operate on hierarchies and politics that he found difficult to navigate. His supervisor, a career security manager named Derek Walsh, had made it clear during orientation that Bobby's primary responsibility was protecting the company's executives and high-value assets, not playing hero for every minor incident that might occur in the sprawling office complex that housed nearly 3,000 employees. Across 47 floors, Bobby's own journey to single fatherhood had begun 2 years earlier when his wife, Sarah, unable to cope with the stress of military deployments and his subsequent struggles with PTSD, had decided that she needed to find herself and had moved across the country to pursue what she called a new beginning. The divorce had been swift and painful, leaving Bobby with full custody of Emma and a determination to prove that he could be both father and mother to his bright, energetic daughter who had inherited his sense of justice and her mother's quick wit. The corporate job, while not as fulfilling as military service, provided stability and regular hours that allowed him to pick Emma up from school every day and help her with homework, before tucking her into bed with stories about brave knights and princesses who saved themselves. It was during his 3rd week on the job, while conducting his routine afternoon security rounds through the executive parking garage, that Bobby first encountered the situation that would change everything. The underground parking area was typically quiet during business hours, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting that cast long shadows between the rows of expensive cars belonging to the company's senior management. As he rounded the corner near the elevator banks, Bobby heard voices that immediately caught his attention, not because they were particularly loud, but because something in their tone triggered the protective instincts that had been honed through years of military training and refined by his experience as a father. Near a sleek silver BMW, 3 teenage boys who appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old had surrounded a younger girl who couldn't have been more than 12. The boys were dressed in expensive private school uniforms, their voices carrying the entitled arrogance that often came with wealth and privilege, while the girl wore a simple public school uniform and carried a worn backpack that suggested more modest circumstances. Even from a distance, Bobby could see that the girl was frightened, her small frame pressed against the car as the boys made comments that were clearly designed to intimidate and humiliate her. "Come on, scholarship girl," one of the boys was saying, his voice dripping with contempt. "We know you don't belong here. Why don't you just go back to whatever poor neighborhood you crawled out of and stop pretending you're good enough to be in the same building as real people?" The other boys laughed at this cruel taunt, and Bobby could see the girl's shoulders trembling as she tried to make herself smaller, her eyes darting around desperately looking for an escape route that didn't seem to exist. Bobby's military training kicked in immediately, his mind automatically assessing the situation and calculating the best approach to diffuse the confrontation without escalating it unnecessarily. These weren't enemy combatants or dangerous criminals. but they were clearly using their size and numbers to intimidate someone much smaller and more vulnerable than themselves. The protective instinct that had made him an excellent soldier and devoted father now compelled him to act, regardless of whatever corporate policies might discourage intervention in situations that didn't directly threaten company assets. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Bobby said in a calm but authoritative voice as he approached the group, his military bearing immediately commanding attention. "Is there a problem here?" The boys turned toward him with surprise and annoyance, clearly not accustomed to being challenged by adults who didn't recognize their presumed social status. The tallest of the three, a blond boy with a kind of smug expression that suggested he'd never faced real consequences for his actions, stepped forward with an attitude that Bobby recognized from dealing with entitled junior officers, who thought their family connections made them untouchable. "This doesn't concern you, security guy," the boy said dismissively. "We're just having a conversation with our friend here. Nothing for you to worry about." Bobby's trained eye immediately caught the lie. The girl's body language screamed fear and distress, while the boy's positioning and tone indicated predatory behavior rather than friendly conversation. He'd seen similar dynamics in conflict zones, where those with power used intimidation to control those without it, and he'd learned that such behavior only escalated when left unchecked. "I can see that she's uncomfortable," Bobby replied evenly, stepping slightly closer so that his presence would be more imposing without being overtly threatening. "And since this is private property where I'm responsible for everyone's safety, I'm going to have to ask you boys to move along and let the young lady go about her business." The girl looked up at Bobby with a mixture of relief and gratitude that reminded him of Emma's expression when he'd helped her deal with a classroom bully the previous year, and he felt his resolve strengthened even further. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the sudden arrival of a woman whose presence immediately changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Victoria Hartwell, the CEO and founder of Meridian Industries, emerged from the elevator with the brisk efficiency that had made her one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. At 48 years old, Victoria had built her company from a small startup in her garage into a billion-dollar corporation through a combination of brilliant engineering insights, ruthless business acumen, and an unwavering commitment to innovation that had revolutionized several industries. "What's going on here?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had commanded boardrooms and dominated business negotiations for over 2 decades. Bobby noticed immediately that her eyes went first to the girl whose face had transformed from fear to embarrassment at being seen in such a vulnerable position. The 3 boys, meanwhile, had suddenly lost their swagger and were looking around nervously, as if trying to calculate whether they could escape the situation without facing consequences for their behavior. "Ma'am," Bobby said respectfully, "I was just addressing a situation where these young men were bothering this girl. Everything's under control now." Victoria's sharp eyes took in the scene quickly, her business mind automatically processing the dynamics and implications of what she was witnessing. She'd built her success partly on her ability to read people and situations accurately, and it was immediately clear to her that Bobby had intervened to protect someone who needed help. The girl, meanwhile, had been watching this entire exchange with growing mortification, not because she was embarrassed by Bobby's intervention, but because she hadn't wanted her mother to see her in such a vulnerable position. At 12 years old, Madison Hartwell was already showing signs of the intelligence and determination that had made her mother so successful, but she was also struggling with the unique challenges that came with being the daughter of one of the city's most prominent business leaders. The private school bullies had targeted her not despite her family's wealth and status, but because of it, using her privilege as a weapon to make her feel guilty and isolated from her peers at the public school she attended by choice. "These boys were just leaving," Victoria said firmly, her tone making it clear that this wasn't a request but a directive. The three teenagers, suddenly realizing that they had stumbled into a situation far beyond their understanding, mumbled apologies and hurried toward the elevator, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Bobby watched them go with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully de-escalated a potentially harmful situation without resorting to violence or creating unnecessary drama. "Thank you," Madison said quietly to Bobby, her voice still shaky from the encounter but carrying a sincerity that reminded him of his own daughter's honesty. "They've been following me around for weeks, saying terrible things. I didn't know what to do." Victoria felt her heart break a little as she realized that her daughter had been dealing with this.